Welcome to the Missions Book Podcast, where we talk with authors about their books in the missions field. And today I'm excited to welcome Larry Caldwell, who has extensive background in missions and cross-cultural education. And he's the author of a new book called The Bible in Culture, Reading the Bible with All the World Using Ethnohermeneutics. So Larry, welcome. Thank you for being here today. And could you start by telling listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Maddie. Yeah, I'm just a regular guy. Grew up in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, one of the most monocultural places on earth at that time, and got called to missions in college at a place called Bethel College, St. Paul, Minnesota, now known as Bethel University, and went to Urbana 76, is a long time ago, and got the missions bug there. Met my wife there actually at Urbana 76. Both of us were called to missions. We first went to overseas in 1980 and spent off and on the better part of 25 years living overseas. In a couple of different places in the Philippines and also in mainland China for parts of 2 years. So mostly in Asia was where our ministry was. The last 21 years in Manila in the Philippines. I'm currently a senior missiologist with a mission organization called Converge Worldwide, and also academic dean of a seminary called Kairos University, and also professor of Bible and intercultural studies there. So I've got 4 kids and 4 grandkids. So there you go.
Yeah, that's great. So you've spent a lot of time teaching overseas and globally. Could you tell us more about how these cross-cultural experiences shaped how you view the Bible interpretation?
Yeah, great question. For me, it's just been very interesting as I've had the opportunity to travel literally all over the world and teach in Bible schools and seminaries. The first thing I do, well, not the first, but among the very first things I do when I go to a seminary Bible college is I go right to their library. And I want to see what kind of library resources they have, what books they're using, what's available in the local language, and all those kinds of questions. And inevitably, I find the same Western textbooks in these non-Western theological libraries. And so that's really, from the very outset, from our first teaching experience back in 1980 at a small Bible school in the middle of nowhere in the rural Philippines. We're actually literally in a sugarcane field where the college was located. And that college had everything was brought over from the United States, including the library, a beautiful 5,000 volume library, but all of them were in English, and it was all Western texts and issues that they were dealing with. But obviously enough, our students were not Western. From the very get-go, got me to thinking, hey, what are we really doing here? And so I did some studies in the whole area of colonization and what anthropologists are calling authoritative knowledge, and realizing that in most places around the world where Christianity has gained a great footholds, they come out of backgrounds of colonization. And the whole idea of authoritative knowledge is that those who are colonized accept as authoritative those things that come from the colonizers. And so that got me to really thinking, how have we done this in terms of theology, even how we've done this in terms of Bible interpretation? And so that's really set me off really from the very beginning to think there's got to be better ways to do teaching in non-Western theological institutions, Bible schools and seminaries, and led me on a long journey, including my own PhD studies in this whole area of trying to do a better job at interpreting the Bible in especially non-Western context.
Yeah, that's really interesting. A juxtaposition of like being in a sugarcane field and then having all these Western books is quite striking.
Yeah, and the fact is that they I was teaching all sorts of things, but one of the courses I taught was I taught Hebrew, I taught Greek, at this Bible college, and the students didn't have to Hebrew and Greek texts, and except for in the library. And so that the library is open in the evening, and they could check out a Greek text, and it was just wild to think, we're doing this, but really they're never going to use this stuff. And of course, I think as a Westerner, especially as an American, I can solve their problems, and so I did all sorts of things to try to do that. Didn't work very well. So we really got to think through again, how do we teach? What do we teach, and why do we teach the way that we do?
Yeah, that's great. So what first led you to question the dominant historical grammatical method in the West and doubt that that was the only faithful way to read Scripture?
I'll just answer this by telling a story. And again, this comes out of our very first year of ministry in the Philippines at this small Bible school in the middle of a sugarcane field, where I was teaching a class on theology, the whole theology of sin and salvation, and the role of guilt in all of that. And I was teaching on the Hebrew word for guilt and sin, which is asham. And I had done a really good word study and looked at it, the word of sham and the Hebrew and the original context and so on. And I'm giving this lecture. I'm just coming at it from the judicial side of sin, being guilt and whatnot, from a Western perspective. And one of my students, I'll never forget, her name is Josephine. She raised her hand and changed my life, literally, with what she said. She said, "Sir, we Filipinos don't feel guilt." I go, "What?
Wow.
You don't feel guilt?" That's the whole basis of how our salvation is in terms of justification, because of all of this kind of stuff. And she said, "No, sir, we don't feel guilt. What we feel is shame and broken relationship because of our sin." And I go, "Oh, okay, well, let me think about that." And so I go back, study Asham, and it's there. Okay.
Wow.
The shame aspect is just as prominent as the guilt and judicial aspect. The broken relationship aspect is there, but I didn't get it. And I'm using all these good Western tools that I've been taught, and she is using a basic understanding of this is not applicable to us. This is what this is. And she's actually midrashing the text. That is this. For our context, asham means this. Okay, it's broken relationship, it's shame. And that changed everything for me, because I started to see, hey, what I'm teaching is not necessarily appropriate for where my students are. And so we basically, I probably shouldn't say that, but we just closed up our Western textbook. And I said, okay, what are your theological issues? And we're going to look at the Bible and find out what those answers are in the Bible itself. And you're going to help me do this, because I need your help, because I don't know anything about your culture and you are the experts. And so that to me changed everything. So if she hadn't raised her hand and challenged her professor, which is a very not a culturally appropriate thing to do in the Philippine culture at that time, her bravery led me along this whole path of trying to figure out, how do we do theology? How do we do Bible interpretation in ways that are more effective?
Wow, that's great. That leads us to the next question, which is about ethnohermeneutics, which is the subject of your book. Right. And so can you describe what it is and how it contrasts with the typical Western approach?
Yeah, I'm just going to read the formal definition. Okay, this
Sure.
will get us started here. And this is from the book. Ethnohermeneutics is Bible interpretation done in cross-cultural, multicultural, and multi-generational contexts that, whenever possible, uses culturally appropriate dynamic hermeneutical approaches that are already in place in that culture. The primary goal being to interpret the Bible, as well as to communicate the truths of the Bible in ways that will be best understood from within the worldview of the receptor culture. Okay? So this definition, there's several aspects to it, but the first thing I really want to make clear to everyone is that trying to read the Bible with the people that we're ministering among is not just for missionaries. It's not just a cross-cultural thing. It's a multicultural thing, especially in terms of how God is bringing the nations, especially to North America and to everywhere. There's just such a mixture of even my own city, which was of Sioux Falls, where I'm now at again. When I grew up here, it was 2% non-Anglo, non-white. Today, 1 out of every 10 people in Sioux Falls was born outside of the United States. And so it's just, we got 80 different languages in the school system. It's just an incredible change. And that's what God's doing everywhere. So these principles of ethnohermeneutics and the stuff that I talk about in the book are really something that is something for every pastor, everyone working in any kind of a multi-cultural situation, which most of us are nowadays. And it's also multi-generational. I think one of the reasons why we're having such, and we have had in the past as well, such generational issues, and especially in light of the fact that we're losing, especially in North America and Europe, we're losing what are known as the nuns, the NONESs, those who, young people who don't see the church as relevant. I think one of the reasons is because we haven't made the Bible relevant to them. And so the book tries to do that, and ethnohermeneutics tries to do that, to say, okay, what are those things, kind of two dimensions to it. What are those things that the culture, whether it's young people or other cultures, or how do they think? Why do they think the way they do? How do they interpret issues? How do they interpret reality in terms of what they're reading and what they're viewing? All of those kinds of things. And how can we use those to help them better interpret the Bible? For most of us, especially theologians and Bible teachers like myself, it's more of, we've got the answer of how you should interpret the Bible. And if you take our class, we'll teach you how to do that. Well, most people aren't going to do that. Most followers of Jesus aren't going to do that. They're going to just read the Bible and interpret the Bible in light of their worldview and who they are. And that's where we, I think, have to put more emphasis on our people that we're dealing with. How do they think? How do they interact with what they're reading and what they're viewing? What's their concept of reality? How do they arrive at truth? And if we think that the Bible is the ultimate truth, how do they arrive at truth in terms of anything? And how now can we use that to help them understand the truths of the Bible? And so I think a huge part of ethnohermeneutics is trying to understand the cultures that we are among, even if they're our own cultures. How do our people think? How do those who are not in the church think in terms of interpreting whatever it is? And how can we help them better then understand the Bible in terms of this? So in some cultures, we were able to actually use some of their hermeneutical methods that are there and use those to bring the truths of the Bible. But at the very least, by understanding the other cultures and where they're at, we can communicate the truths of the Bible much better than we often do. So ethnohermeneutics really involves both of those things. But trying as hard as we can to see what are those dynamic hermeneutical approaches that are already in the text. And the thing about that is that it's biblical. And this is where you asked about, how does it differ from the traditional ways that we interpret the Bible today? Most of us have been trained in some aspect of what's known as the grammatical historical method or historical criticism, or however you want to talk about that. And that method is really good. We can, you look for the original context and what the original author is trying to say, and all the things that go along with that. Very good stuff, okay? And it's very helpful, but it's something that you've got to along with that are not that easy to learn. And so a lot of that you have to go to Bible school or seminary to really understand that, and so on. As good as it is, as you look at how Jesus and Paul, for example, interpreted the Old Testament, they didn't use grammatical historical methods or tools. In fact, when you look at how they quote from the Old Testament, it's like they just pull this totally out of context. And it's like, oh, wow. So a part of we've got to relook, I think, at how did Jesus interpret the Old Testament? How did Paul interpret the Old Testament? Because as we see how they did it, we gain some insights, I think, in terms of how people today can interpret the scripture, because both Jesus and Paul use first century hermeneutical methods as they interpreted scripture. One of those methods being what I look at in quite a bit of detail in the book is the hermeneutical method of midrash. One of many, but this is one that they use. And in my mind, if Jesus and Paul can use the hermeneutical methods that are a part of their cultures, why can't we today use hermeneutical methods that are a part of the cultures of the peoples that we're working with? And they use in the culture the approaches that they are most familiar with. And this is something that I think across the board, Bible college, seminary teachers, missionaries, we've really never thought this through very well. And in my own experiences at both, I had great teachers in college and in seminary, wonderful. I learned so much from them, but I never had anything in terms of how did Jesus interpret the Old Testament? How did Paul interpret the Old Testament? And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, if the Bible is the final authority for everything that we think and everything that we do, wouldn't it be good for us to look at how Jesus and Paul interpreted the Old Testament to help guide us in Bible interpretation? But none of that was there. And so I think we've really got to think through some of the assumptions that we make in terms of how we approach the Bible, and really take a hard look at is the Western approach, as good as it is it the most appropriate approach or the best approach for other cultures, and maybe even for our own culture? And especially as the West turns, most people, there's a couple of billion people around the world who are oral learners. They don't know how to read or write. Even Westerners now are more and more, especially young people, are oral preference learners. Okay, they know how to read, but they get their information and what they need from watching their phones and videos and all that kind of stuff, social media stuff that's going on. So all this is to say that we've really got to pay more attention to how are we teaching people how to interpret the Bible, and is it really relevant to what their situations really are?
Yeah, that's a really great description of what your book is about. And I really appreciate how your book focuses on those people who they're not going to be able to go to Bible school, or they're not going to be able to learn all of the historical grammatical tools. And while those are good, they still need ways to be able to faithfully read scripture. And I appreciate that you have those folks in view.
Yeah, we've got to, because the church is increasingly moving away from the West. It's moving to the non-West, and they're going to hopefully use methods and tools that are most appropriate for them. It's starting to happen. It needs to happen a lot more.
Yeah, that's really great. So what conversations do you hope your book will spark within seminaries, churches, and mission organizations?
First of all, I hope more schools will add courses in terms of how the New Testament. I think that's really crucial to start to open people's eyes in terms of maybe other possibilities in hermeneutics. I think that our schools, as good as they are, we need to really get real in terms of what is the situation outside of the walls of the seminary or the Bible school or whatever it is. What are our churches and our mission organizations? What do our pastors and our missionaries, what do they really need to be successful and competent in the ministry context that God has called them to be in? Is what they're learning in seminary or Bible school really helping them? Or is it is it something that makes us feel good as the teachers and not really as relevant to for our students as it can be. And so I think that I'm hoping that the book will really stimulate that kind of discussions among Bible teachers, theologians, and so on, in a good way, not in a way to say what we've been doing in the past is totally bad or wrong. It's really good, but it's incomplete. We've got to go, I think, to the next step in terms of how do we do Bible interpretation, and this is the subtitle of the book, with the people that we are working among, whether it's our own people in our churches in our own locations, or if it's in another cultural context. How do we work with them, and how can they work with their own people so that they are relevant? And my bottom line is, I don't think learning a Western hermeneutical method in a non-Western context is going to help these pastors and missionaries who are working in non-Western contexts to make the Bible relevant to their own non-Western context. I just don't think that's going to happen in the way that it could happen, much more dynamically, appropriately, more concerned with those who are hearing the truths of the Bible being talked about, until we do some of these things and really do our homework in terms of who are our people and what are they thinking, what are they like, and how can we help them, and how can they help us, like Josephine helped me to see that there are different ways to approach the Bible.
Yeah, well, thank you, Larry. Your book has been very thought-provoking for me, and I hope our readers will find it that way as well, and will really stir some conversations and changes in the seminaries and Bible schools. So
Great.
thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been good to talk with you.